Montana Territory. 1883, the wind blew sharp that night through Miles City, tugging at the canvas roofs of the wagon yard and stirring the smell of horses, dust, and smoke. Franklin Knox paused at the gate, squinting through the dim lantern light that swung from a post. He was only there to check on his gelding before heading back to his rented room above the saloon. But something stopped him cold. There, curled beneath the back wheel of a freight wagon, was a woman, half covered by her own arms, shivering in the chill. He moved closer, boots crunching on the packed dirt. "Miss," he said, lowering his voice. She jerked awake, eyes wide with fear. Her dress was worn, shoes scuffed near through, and her cheeks hollow from days without proper food. A small carpetbag sat tucked beneath her legs like it might be stolen. She pushed herself upright, shoulders stiff. "I am not begging," she said quickly. "I just needed a place to sleep." He crouched down, removing his hat. "I believe you, but you're freezing." "Take this." He unfolded the thick wool blanket from his saddle roll and offered it out. The woman hesitated, watching him like she expected the offer to come with a price. He met her eyes, steady and without pressure. No catch. Just warmth. After a long moment, she reached for it, slow, cautious, and wrapped it around her shoulders. She did not thank him with words, but the way her body eased as the wool touched her skin said enough. "I'm Franklin Knox," he said. "You got a name, Alara Ellison." He smiled slightly. "That is a good name." She looked down, fingers twisting in the edge of the blanket. "I will be gone by morning." He shook his head. "No, you will not without a hot meal and a safer place to sleep. I do not want charity. It is not charity. It is decency." She looked like she did not believe in decency anymore. Franklin stood and offered his hand. "Come on, then." She rose slowly, still clutching the blanket. He led her out of the yard, toward the boarding house kitchen where he had an arrangement with the cook. It was past supper, but Franklin knocked until the door opened. "Make her a plate," he said, nodding toward Alara. The cook frowned. "You bringing strays home now?" "She is not a stray," Franklin said. "She is a guest." Alara sat at the corner table, quiet as a ghost. When the food came, a plate of beans, cornbread, and stew, she ate like someone who had not seen a real meal in days. Franklin took the seat across from her and waited until she finished. "I will pay you back," she said, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "No need. I do not take things I cannot repay." He saw it then in her posture, in the way she did not flinch but still never fully looked at him. She had been through something hard, maybe more than one thing. "Tell me where you are headed," he said. She hesitated. "Nowhere. I was with a freight family. They dropped me in Miles City 2 days ago, said I was too much trouble." "You with them long?" She nodded. "Since May. I helped with cooking, cleaning. I thought we had a deal. You got family?" "No." He leaned back. "Well then, you are riding with me tomorrow." Alara blinked. "What?" "I work cattle north of the Musselshell. My ranch is quiet. I could use help around the place." "You will have a roof, food, and something stable. And you think I will say yes?" "I think you need a life that is not this." She looked at him, and something in her eyes cracked wide open, like maybe, just maybe, she wanted to believe someone could offer that without asking for something back. "I do not know you," she said softly. "You will." He stood then, and she stood too, slower. He walked her upstairs to a small spare room beside his own. Simple cot, a good door. "Sleep. I will be outside come sunrise." She paused in the doorway, still holding that blanket. "Why are you helping me?" He shrugged. "Because when I found you sleeping in that wagon yard, I saw someone who looked like they had not been given much, and I got more than I need." She nodded, but her hand lingered on the doorframe. "Good night, Franklin." "Good night, Alara." The next morning came cold and bright. Franklin was already saddled by the time she stepped out, her hair pinned back, wearing the same threadbare dress and his blanket around her shoulders. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. Yes. They rode out of Miles City together. Franklin kept the pace easy, letting her adjust to the rhythm of the horse. She never complained, though her hands trembled from chill and exhaustion. They reached his ranch by nightfall. It was small, 2 barns, a corral, and a one-room house nestled against the edge of the river bend. No hired hands, just him and now. Her. He showed her the kitchen, the wash basin, the loft space where she could sleep. She moved like someone who had not had a place of her own in a long time. He watched her trace her fingers along the windowsill as if trying to decide whether it was real. "I will cook tomorrow," she said. "You do not have to." "I want to," he nodded. "Then I would like that." They did not speak much that night. But when he walked past the loft ladder, he saw her curled up under his blanket, her eyes closed, her chest moving slow and steady. And for the first time, she looked peaceful. He stood there a moment longer than he meant to, then turned in. Days passed, then weeks. Alara took to the work like she had always lived there. She cooked, tidied, kept the woodpile stocked. She rode out with him sometimes, helping mend fence or carry supplies. She never asked for more than what she was given, never complained. But slowly, she laughed again. She smiled when he handed her a mug of coffee in the morning. She teased him when he came back muddy from out by the creek, and Franklin, he started to feel it, deep in his chest. The way she moved around his house like it was hers. The way her eyes softened when she looked at him. The way he missed her when she was out of sight. One night, a storm rolled in. Rain hammered the roof, wind howling through the cracks in the wood. He stood at the window, watching it roll over the hills. Alara stepped up beside him. "I used to be afraid of storms," she said. "You are not anymore. I think I am just not afraid of much now." He looked down at her. "You do not have to be afraid here." She turned to face him, her voice low. "You gave me a blanket and a place to sleep, Franklin. But you also gave me something I never had before." "What is that?" "A choice." He reached out, brushing her fingers gently with his own. "You still have it, you always will." She did not pull away. "Then I choose this." And that was the moment everything changed. By the time the cottonwoods along the river turned gold and brittle, Alara had sewn herself into the rhythm of Franklin's land like a thread mended into frayed cloth. She rose before the sky blued, kneading dough with red hands, and tucked the ledger books into her lap in the evenings, squinting by lantern light. She asked questions about the cattle tallies, about the irrigation ditch he'd dug 2 summers before, about the debts left from the drought year. Franklin gave her answers, though it startled him, the way she listened without flinching. One afternoon, as the light slanted long across the field, Franklin returned from the west pasture with his shirt damp from creek water and his boots caked in clay. Alara stood on the porch, her arms dusted in flour, watching the horizon. "There's smoke beyond the ridge," she said. He stepped beside her, scanning the sky. "Dry lightning last night. Might have caught somewhere north. You ride to check, soon as I stable the horse." She turned back toward the doorway. "I'll pack bread and jerky." Franklin didn't argue. She handed him a cloth bundle a few minutes later, fingers brushing his wrist as she did. He looked at her then, not just in passing. Her face was flushed from the oven heat, stray hair sticking to her cheek. But her eyes were steady, and her mouth firm with purpose. He rode out before the sun dipped, made it back near midnight. The fire had died out on its own, no harm done. When he opened the door, the lamp was still burning. She'd left a basin of warm water by the hearth and a folded shirt on the table. Her own door to the loft was drawn shut. The next morning, she was already outside, arranging kindling beneath the kettle hook. She didn't ask what he'd seen. Instead, she handed him a coffee cup and sat beside him on the steps, the silence between them easy. "Alara," he said after a while. You ever think about staying? She didn't answer right away, only sipped from her cup. I think about what staying means. He set his mug down slowly. And I've slept in barns and freight wagons and behind feed stores, told myself it was freedom. She turned her head, her gaze on the hills. But waking up in the same bed, knowing I'll see the same face, there's something in that. Franklin watched her quietly. I'm not trying to press you, I know. That's why I'm still here. She stood then, brushing the dust from her skirt. There's a hen nesting in the rye bin again. You want eggs, you better help me coax her down. He laughed under his breath and followed her around the side of the barn. Later that week, a letter arrived from Billings. Franklin brought it in from the post rider and set it on the table without comment. Alara glanced at it while wiping her hands on her apron. From your brother, she asked. He nodded. He's selling off the last of our father's land. Asked if I want the windmill. You going to take it? Franklin took a long drink of water before answering. It doesn't belong here, not anymore. Alara folded a dishcloth, eyes thoughtful. You too close. Used to be. Before everything got divided up. She didn't press, just rinsed the last plate and set it in the drying rack. That night, as they sat outside watching the stars, she turned to him, bare feet tucked beneath her on the porch bench. When I was little, I used to count the stars to fall asleep. Thought if I got through them all, something good would happen. Did it? No, but I got faster at counting. He leaned his head back against the post. You don't have to count anymore. She looked over at him, the porch lamp catching the curve of her jaw. I know. There was no need to say it, but he reached over anyway and took her hand. She let him. The next morning she came down from the loft in a faded blue dress he hadn't seen before. Her hair was neatly pinned and she held a small cloth satchel. I want to ride into town, she said. Franklin raised an eyebrow. Anything wrong? No, she said. I want to buy fabric and nails, and maybe a good needle. He saddled the horses without another word. They rode into Miles City just past noon, dust trailing behind them. When they walked through the mercantile, Franklin waited while she ran her fingers over bolts of muslin and calico, her brow furrowed in concentration. She chose a deep green fabric, nothing fancy, but fine enough to matter. On the ride back, she held the parcel close. I want to make curtains, she said. For the kitchen window. Franklin smiled to himself, the kind of smile that settled deep and didn't need showing. You think the kitchen needs curtains? I think maybe I do. The wind picked up as they reached the rise overlooking the ranch. She slowed her horse, looking at the house below. Doesn't look small anymore, she said. Franklin nodded. That's because it's not empty. She turned to him, and this time her eyes didn't look away. I'm choosing it, Franklin, not just for now. He didn't say anything. He just reached over, took the reins from her fingers, and led both horses down the hill home. The first snow came early that year, dusting the tops of the cottonwoods and settling in low drifts against the outbuildings. Alara stood in the doorway with her sleeves rolled to the elbows, watching Franklin haul a half-frozen bale off the sled and drop it by the barn. He moved slower than usual, favoring his left shoulder. You're hurt, she said as he came up the steps. He brushed melting snow from his collar and didn't answer right away. Horse threw me yesterday out near the gulch. Ground's hard. Shoulder caught the fall. She stepped aside to let him pass, closing the door tight behind them. You didn't say anything. No good in fretting over what's already done. Alara crossed the room to the washstand. Sit. You're not splitting another stick of wood with that arm. I've still got things need doing. You also have two hands and only one of them works. He didn't argue, just dropped onto the bench near the stove while she poured hot water into a basin. When she knelt beside him and reached for the buttons at his cuff, he went still. You don't have to, I know. She peeled the shirt back carefully, revealing a bruise the color of iron spreading across his shoulder and down toward his ribs. Her touch was gentle but certain, her brow drawn in concentration. "I'll steep comfrey in wormwood. You'll drink it and you'll rest." Franklin's voice was quieter now. "You ever tended injury before?" "My uncle took a bullet through the thigh at Fort Smith. He said I had better hands than the doctors did." Franklin watched her as she worked, the way she moved with purpose and certainty. He didn't ask about the uncle, didn't ask how long she'd been caring for others before someone came along to care for her. Later, when the light thinned to gold, Alara brought the steeped herbs in a tin mug and set it in his palm. "It'll taste like bitter bark," she said, "but it'll help." He drank it, face wrinkling at the taste. "You always this bossy?" "Only when people are too stubborn to look after themselves." Her eyes lingered on him a moment longer before she turned back toward the hearth. He watched her, noting the way her shoulders had squared over the last month, how she no longer hesitated when she moved through the house, how she began humming low under her breath while she worked. The next morning, Franklin stayed in, tending the books at the table while Alara chopped onions and carrots for a stew. Outside, snow continued falling in slow, heavy flakes. The house smelled of juniper smoke and broth. "You ever miss the places you've been?" Franklin asked, not looking up from the ledger. "No," she said. "I only miss the parts where I felt safe." He set the pencil down. "You feel safe here?" She turned toward him, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes, I do." That night, after the lamps were turned down low, Alara came down the ladder from the loft barefoot. Franklin, still awake at the table, looked up as she crossed the room. "I couldn't sleep," she said. He stood and took her hand, leading her to the chair he'd just left. "You don't have to go back up," he said. "Not if you'd rather stay near." She settled into the chair, wrapping his old wool coat around her shoulders. He sat beside her, neither of them speaking for a long while. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls, but inside, the fire held steady. "Alara," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want this to be something that ends when winter passes." She looked at him with eyes that didn't hold fear anymore, only quiet knowing. "It won't," she said. "I've already chosen it." He reached for her hand again, holding it between both of his. Her fingers were warm against his. "I've never been the kind of man who knows how to say things right," he said. "But I know you've changed the way the days feel. I don't want to go back to how it was before." "You won't have to," she said, "because I'm not leaving." He leaned forward then, and she met him halfway, their foreheads touching, the silence around them thick with understanding. No declarations, no need for them. Just breathe and closeness, and the sense of something deep taking root. They stayed like that until the fire burned low, the last light flickering across the worn floorboards. No storm outside, no hunger, no distance. Just two people who had found something neither of them knew they'd needed until it was offered freely. And neither of them would ever let it slip. By late January, the wind came off the hills with teeth. Ice rimmed the troughs, and the days shortened into a soft hush of pale color and wood smoke. Alara had begun stitching the green fabric she'd bought into curtains, and Franklin had taken to reading aloud from an old almanac in the evenings, his voice slow and steady as the fire cracked beside them. One morning, with the sky still dim, Alara stepped outside to gather kindling and came back in with a look Franklin hadn't seen on her before. "Someone's coming up the road," she said, setting the basket down without taking off her gloves. He stood, went to the window. A rider, hunched against the cold, made slow progress through the snow-rutted path. The horse moved stiffly, and the man wore a coat too thin for the season. Franklin opened the door and stepped out, Alara just behind him. The rider pulled up near the porch and removed his hat. His cheeks were raw and his breath came in shallow clouds. "You Franklin Knox?" he asked. "I am." The man nodded, eyes flicking to Alara. "Name's Merritt. I worked under Jeb Calloway down near the Powder River. He's gone now. Pneumonia took him last month." Franklin's jaw tensed. "I knew him some years back. What brings you here?" Merritt shifted in the saddle. "He told me if I ever found myself with nothing left, I should find you. Said you had room for a man willing to earn his keep." Franklin looked at Alara, then back to Merritt. "You eat yet today?" "No, sir." "Then get down." Alara had already turned toward the house, taking her gloves off with quick fingers. They gave Merritt a plate and a corner of the barn to sleep in. He said little, but cleaned the tack without being asked and mended a broken gate hinge before nightfall. Franklin watched him with guarded eyes. That evening, while the stew simmered and Merritt remained outside brushing down his horse, Alara leaned against the counter. "You trust him?" she asked. "I don't trust anyone right away," she nodded. "He's younger than you, still old enough to know the difference between work and trouble." She folded her arms. "He's from near where I grew up." Franklin turned toward her. "You recognize his name?" "No, but I knew the Calloway outfit. They moved cattle through my uncle's land the year before I left Arkansas." There was a beat of quiet between them, the kind that had grown familiar, not heavy, just careful. "I want to know more about that," he said. She looked up from the floor. "About what?" "Your uncle's land." "What it was like there." Her voice dropped. "It was green. Not like this. We had apple trees, a spring that never dried up. My mother used to sing while she shelled peas on the porch. After she died, my father sold most of it off. My uncle tried to keep what he could." Franklin stepped closer. "Did you ever think of going back?" "No," she said. "There's nothing there now but stumps and scattered fences." He reached for her hand, warm from the cook stove. "You've got trees here too, might not be apples, but they'll hold." She smiled, quiet and sure. "I know." The next morning, Merritt asked if he could stay on past the week. Franklin agreed, with the understanding that he'd sleep in the barn until spring and take his share of the work without complaint. Alara didn't protest, but she kept her distance, watching Merritt the way a person watches a kettle boil just in case. One afternoon, while Franklin was out checking the south fence line, Alara found Merritt splitting wood behind the barn. "You're from Arkansas?" she asked, arms folded against the chill. He paused, axe balanced against his knee. "I was, before the war." "Which regiment?" 27th Arkansas Infantry. Lost 2 brothers near Helena." She nodded once. "My father was conscripted in '63. Never came back." Merritt wiped his forehead with the back of his glove. "Didn't think anyone out here would ask about that." "I don't ask often. Just wanted to know if you remembered the land." He looked up at her. "I remember it every time I step in snow." She left him to his work and went inside, where Franklin had returned and was warming his hands near the stove. "Fence held?" she asked. He nodded, peeling off his gloves. "Coyotes have been nosing the edge, but nothing's broken through." She stirred the pot, then set the spoon down and turned to face him. "I didn't know you'd ever lost someone in the war." Franklin leaned back against the counter. "My cousin. He was more like a brother. We were 17 when he enlisted." "Did you?" "I stayed behind. My father made me run the cattle alone, said one of us had to keep the land intact." Alara studied his face, the lines that didn't come from sun or age. "I'm glad you did," she said. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you'd stayed where you were?" "Sometimes. But I think I would have disappeared in pieces. Here, I know where I am." He stepped toward her, close enough that she could hear the breath leave him. "That life you never knew you could have," he said softly. "I want to build it with you, not just a house or a season, something lasting." Alara's voice was steady, but her eyes filled with tenderness. "You already have." He touched her cheek then, and she leaned into it, not hesitant, not uncertain, just home. Outside, the wind sighed low through the cottonwoods, and inside the fire burned steady, warming a house no longer quiet, no longer waiting. March broke open with the slow thaw of ice along the riverbanks. The cattle moved easier, noses steaming in the morning cold, and the lowest edges of the hills began to green. Franklin had repaired the porch rail with Merritt, while Alara mended the tack shed roof with a pitch of tar and scrap canvas. The work passed steady, and the days lengthened. One morning, Alara stood by the stove, apron dusted with flour, her hands shaping dough into small rounds. Franklin leaned against the frame of the doorway, arms crossed loosely. "You've never mentioned what made you leave Arkansas," he said, voice quiet but clear. She didn't stop kneading. "There was a man. My father arranged it. Said he had a good horse string and 20 acres. Franklin didn't move, just waited. I met him twice. He told me my cooking would improve with silence," she said, eyes on the dough. "I waited until he went south for timber and walked away before the wedding." She placed the rolls on a tin sheet and turned. "He wasn't cruel, not yet, but I saw what he'd be. I wasn't going to wait for bruises to prove it." Franklin stepped forward, slow. "You shouldn't have had to choose between being safe and being free." "I don't anymore." They said nothing else until the oven door clanged shut and the scent of baking filled the room. That afternoon, Merritt rode out with a trader headed toward Fort Keogh. He left a short note on the table, thanking them both for the winter and leaving behind an oilcloth roll of sharpened tools Franklin hadn't asked for. Alara found it first. "He carved his name into the knife handle," she said, turning it over. "People do that when they want to be remembered." Franklin set the knife back down. "He'll do fine." They planted early potatoes in the southern plot a week later. Franklin dug the rows while Alara dropped the cut seed into each furrow, her fingers stained with dirt, her sleeves rolled past the elbows. A red-tail hawk circled overhead, casting a wide shadow that passed over them both. "You want children?" she asked suddenly, not looking up. Franklin straightened, wiped his brow with his sleeve. "I do," she nodded, tucking a lock of hair behind her ear. "I didn't used to. Couldn't imagine bringing someone into a world I didn't trust. And now, I think this world," she said, patting the soil down with the side of her hand, "might be different." They finished the row in silence, but it was the kind that held something blooming beneath it, like roots spreading unseen. That evening, Franklin took a small box from the shelf above the hearth. Inside was a ring, nothing ornate, just a narrow gold band with a tiny turquoise stone set into it. He'd traded for it 3 years earlier in Miles City, not knowing why he kept it. He found Alara in the barn, brushing the mare's coat until it shone in the lantern light. He held the box out, palm open. "I've never asked a woman anything like this," he said, "but I want to ask you." She looked at the ring, then at him, her eyes wide but steady. "You already know my answer," she said. "I want to hear you say it." She took the ring, slid it onto her finger, and met his gaze full. "Yes." They married under the cottonwoods as the first buds appeared, with the preacher from Forsyth riding in and the neighbor from 2 Ridges over standing witness. Alara wore the green dress she'd sewn herself, and Franklin shaved with care for the first time in a month. After the vows, they shared coffee and bread on the porch, the preacher gone, the sun warm on their backs. That night, Alara unpacked the small cedar box she had kept beneath the loft bed. Inside were a folded handkerchief, a torn photograph of her mother, and a ribbon faded to gray. Franklin watched her lay them on the table. "I kept things that reminded me where I came from," she said. "Now I want things that show where I'm going." He reached for her hand. "We'll build it together. That spring they planted beans, squash, and 2 rows of sunflowers. The ranch took on a rhythm that belonged to them both. Alara painted the trim of the house with leftover whitewash while Franklin repaired the tool shed roof. The curtains in the kitchen hung clean and straight, and the ledger showed no red come June. A letter arrived from Merritt in July, sent from a trail north of the Yellowstone. He'd found work driving cattle and said he'd carry their name with pride. Alara folded the letter carefully and tucked it behind the spice tin. By autumn, Alara's belly had begun to round. She didn't speak of it often, but Franklin noticed how she leaned back more when she sat, how her steps slowed without her meaning to. One evening, as he returned from the upper pasture, he found her sitting on the porch wrapped in a shawl, her hands resting gently over the swell. He sat beside her. "You feel all right, I feel, full in every way." They watched the sun drop behind the hills and the crickets began to sing. "We'll teach them to ride," he said, "to read the sky and mend a fence right. And to trust silence," she added. He reached for her hand, and she laced her fingers with his. They went inside as the night cooled, the door closing behind them with the soft sound of home. Years passed, and the ranch grew with them. They built a second room onto the house when the baby came a girl, wide-eyed and quiet like her mother. They named her Calla, after the lilies that once bloomed near Alara's childhood spring. Franklin taught her to saddle a pony by the time she was 5. Alara taught her to mix bread dough by feel and measure the stars by the porch rail. Summers passed in golden heat, winters in firelit hush. They aged with grace carved into their hands and faces, never speaking more than what was needed, because what they shared lived in the work, the stillness, the deep knowing. Love, for them, was not a flash. It was the steady tending of a fire that never burned out. And it carried them, always, into the next morning.